Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Courtside View webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune basketball beat writer Steve Walentic. This is our first basketball webcast since last March, so let's catch up on a little old business. First of all, the long drawn-out affair known as the NCAA investigation of Miami and by extension Missouri basketball coach Frank Haith finally came to a close. They had the infractions hearing in June, and then finally the findings came out a few weeks before the season. Frank Haith suspended for 5 games for failure to monitor the program at Miami. Just your thoughts on that punishment and the process in general?
Well, I think your initial reaction when you hear the punishment is to think this is an investigation that went on for more than 2 years, and it nets the head coach at the center of the basketball part of it anyway, a 5-game suspension, and 5 games that realistically Missouri should beat no matter who's on the sideline. So from that standpoint, I think there's a tendency or a temptation to think that the punishment was a little soft, given all that went on, but I think it really ultimately speaks to just how weakened the position of the NCAA has become in all of these matters over the last handful of years.
I think although generally almost everybody that you wanted to read about after it came out said, boy, he should be happy with that 5-game suspension. At the press conference, he, at least publicly, was not happy with it and said he had not done anything wrong and that he had been honest with the NCAA investigators, and therefore, he said he wasn't happy with it. I tend to be on the other side thinking that a 5-game punishment is not too bad considering what might have happened when you read what the NCAA had to say about the matter, which it seemed to me that the whole thing was the NCAA, A, it all took way too long, B, it was corrupt, and C, it sort of showcased how toothless the NCAA has become, because when you run a corrupt investigation, then you really don't have the power to penalize people seriously, because if you do, then they're going to appeal it or sue you and you're probably going to lose. And so I think what ends up happening is the NCAA uses the process itself as a punishment, which is let's drag this thing out so you have this anvil hanging over your head for years. And then B, when we write our infractions report, we're going to put everything in there that we think you did, that we couldn't necessarily prove you did, and then we're going to let everybody, and we're going to release it to the public, and everybody can read what we think you did. And in the case of Frank Haith, they thought he lied to them. I mean, they spelled it out pretty clearly that they kept saying, we did not find this credible, we did not find this believable. And specifically, I think they pointed out that he was alleged to have okayed the payment of $10,000 to Nevin Shapiro's mother.
Through his assistant
coaches, and 3 assistant coaches cashed $3,200 checks at the same bank branch at the same day that they were cut, and so it did seem to be rather suspicious.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question they laid out a lot of circumstantial evidence that they thought they acquired that pointed to something nefarious going on here. But I mean, you're right. They called him a liar without accusing him of lying.
Yeah. So. To me, it just means they think he did all this. They think he covered it up, but through their own screw-ups, they can't prove it, and so they put out what I think would be considered a pretty light penalty. But if they didn't want to put out a major penalty because they knew that if it was made him mad enough to appeal, then they were going to end up on the short end of it. So you end up with this sort of solution that nobody was too happy with, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, if you go back to last January, the reports come out that he's going to be charged with unethical conduct within a matter of days, and then within a matter of days instead, what we have is Mark Emmert admitting that there was unethical conduct, but it was by the NCAA investigative wing. So I think obviously that changed the entire dynamic of the investigation and punishment process, and you end up where we are now. But to your point that just the process becomes a punishment, I think that's true. I think this is something that was hanging over Frank Haith, his coaching staff, for more than 2 years, and something that I think certainly impacted what they could do recruiting-wise. Maybe not as much in the 2013 class, but definitely look at what they were able to do in the 2012 class. I think that was a group that these coaches had high hopes for getting, a significant talent bump into the program, and that really didn't happen. And you see, right now, Tony Criswell, Stefan Jankovic, and Ryan Rosberg are the holdovers from that five-man recruiting group, and none of them is a major high-impact guy. So there was punishment just from the process.
Right. And we did, people have sort of poo-pooed what the 5-game punishment is. As far as Missouri goes, do you think it had any significant impact, Tim Fuller coaching these 5 games for Missouri?
I think a little bit from the standpoint that this is such a young team, such an inexperienced team, particularly in the front court, that what happens is you don't have your head coach there in practice every day, which I think there's value in having that voice there.
If there isn't, there would be no reason to.
Right.
To be paying him,
right.
$2 million. I mean, you would like to think it makes a difference.
Exactly. So that makes a difference. And then on top of it, you have, you learn through experiences in games. I think that's true for basketball players. And you have a head coach, understandably now, and Tim Fuller, who he wants to make sure that they win these 5 games, and that
this is his audition.
Yeah, and the last thing he wants to do is hand Frank Haith a team back that has a loss to a team it probably shouldn't have lost to. So I think he's maybe going to be quicker to leave a guy or pull a guy rather than let him play through some mistakes. I think we'll see later on how much, if at all, this whole situation stunts the growth of the players in the front court. I think that we've already seen Keanu Post and Stefan Jankovic have not played much at all in the second half of some of these games.
Or you might see when Frank Haith comes back, he does it the exact same way. He's a guy that doesn't like to play a long bench either. I mean,
it's possible, but you would think that a head coach is going to have a little bit more big picture view on things and understand that eventually you're going to have to test these guys. And not that Tim Fuller's wrong for doing what he's doing. I think it makes a lot of sense given the situation that he's in. But eventually Missouri is going to have to put some of these guys in some difficult situations and see how they respond, and I don't think that's necessarily happened as much as you might have seen otherwise.
They also haven't been totally blowing teams out like sometimes we see in the past in these non-con games. They are 3-0 though. Talk about how just the way Missouri looks is different. For the last 2 years, they've really been a team that had a point guard, Phil Pressey, who kind of dominated the play. And then also last year had a front court of Alex Oriaki and Lawrence Bowers, who were strong players. This year it's almost the opposite, where the offense is really centered around some pretty good wing-type players, and Jordan Clarkson, who has been running the point, but is kind of maybe more of a natural wing, and then Jabari Brown and Ernest Ross.
Well, I think you look at Phil and Jordan in particular. I mean, they're obviously very different. They do have one similarity in that they're able to get into the lane almost at will on anybody. And I think when Phil got there, he was at his best when he was finding Ricardo Ratliff for a layup or kicking out to Marcus Dedmon for a three-point shot. I think the pressure that Jordan Clarkson puts on a defense is because when he gets in the lane, he's going to score the ball. And he's done that very well. He's averaging over 19 points a game in the first 3 games, despite sitting for significant stretches of the first half of 2 of those games. He didn't play the last really 17 minutes of the first half against Hawaii on Saturday, and still ended up with 13 points. He's a talent when it comes to getting in the paint and scoring the ball. And at 6'5", he's able to finish in traffic a lot better than your typical guard can. But I do think him running the point is a lot different than with Phil, because I found myself noticing a few times that the ball movement isn't necessarily as good. You end up having a lot of guys kind of watching him because he likes to make plays, and he's most comfortable making plays for himself right now. I think it's a weapon to have, but I think he has to be able to balance scoring the ball for himself, which he's very good at, and keeping other people involved, and that's something to watch going forward.
Missouri has the capability, if they so choose, to be one of the bigger teams out there. If you got a 6'5" point guard like Clarkson, you have some 6'5" wings, and then you have, you got a whole list of these big guys, whoever you want to choose. Post is 6'11", Jankovic is 6'11", Rosberg 6'10", Jonathan Williams 6'9", Criswell 6'9". So, I mean, you could put a pretty big team out there if you want to. My question, I guess, is that Missouri's best team? Because I think for some stretches, it almost looks like when you put Wes Clark, the 6-foot freshman, in at point guard, then move Jordan Clarkson off the ball. I don't know. Sometimes to me that looks like their better lineup.
Well, I think if you'd asked me this question last week when Tony Criswell was still suspended, it's an automatic. Missouri's best lineup right now is a small lineup.
Mm-hmm.
I think having Criswell back on Saturday made a little bit of a difference. He brought a different instincts, I feel like, and more aggressiveness. I felt like played harder than some of Missouri's other forwards have in the early going. Not necessarily because they're not trying to play hard, just because it's not natural to them. I think they're thinking. I think Criswell got out there and he just went, and he was going to the front of the rim when a shot went up. Found himself in position for offensive rebounds because he anticipated things better. So with him as an option, I feel like you could put him and Jonathan Williams, him and Ryan Rosberg out there, and you can be pretty effective with a more traditional lineup. But I do think Missouri can be a good team playing small. I do think among their 6 or 7 most talented players are 4 guards, and so having Wes Clark run the point, I think, has the added benefit of moving Jordan Clarkson off the ball where he just has to worry about scoring. I think they're able to rebound pretty well with a smaller lineup because I think Ernest Ross is a pretty good rebounder for a guy who's 6'5". I think if Jonathan Williams continues to progress the way the coaching staff expects, I think that can be a good look for them. And obviously Missouri fans are well aware that you can have a lot of success creating mismatches with a 4-guard lineup. The 2011-12 team did that as well as any team in recent memory. Played 4 guards and didn't have a 4-man in Kim English who could rebound like Ernest Ross. Was maybe more of a scoring threat from the perimeter, although Ross is shooting the ball pretty well from 3-point range right now.
The other, I guess, little X factor in all this is the new officiating emphasis on calling a lot more touch fouls on defense, whereas 2 years ago almost any collision was called a charge. This year's the complete opposite, and so I think it really favors a team that wants to drive to the basket. You're going to get that call all night long.
And all the hand-checking calls that go on before you even get to the rim.
So the teams that can put the ball on the floor and drive the basket, I think, are the ones who are going to get a lot of easy points. And so I think as a coach, all things being equal, you might consider what's my best team for doing that, and maybe a smaller lineup is the way to go there too, as opposed to just trying to throw the ball. I don't think they really have big men that you can just throw the ball on the post and they're going to make a move on somebody and score. I think it's almost always when you see them scoring, it's offensive rebounds or kind of or a dump off pass
off of dribble penetration. And yeah, I mean, Tim Fuller's made that point. We don't have, he said this after the Hawaii game, we don't have guys that we're going to throw it to and let them work on the low block. They gotta play off the guards, and right now Missouri does have guards who are able to get into the lane. Obviously we talked about Clarkson. I think Wes Clark has those skills as well. Ernest Ross, when he drives the ball, which he did very effectively against Hawaii, can be dangerous that way. The thing with him is he's had a tendency to fall in love with his 3-point shot. That's something that Missouri's coaches are going to continue to stay on him about, because he's a better player when he's not just a spot-up shooter. He can be a good spot-up shooter. He shot over 40% from 3-point range in SEC play last year, but I think,
especially on the road, I would like to see him go to the basket more.
Yeah, and you know, Tim Fuller said he's their best athlete. He runs faster than anybody else. He's stronger than anybody else. I think he jumps higher than anybody else.
He ought to be able to guard power forwards as big as he is too.
Yeah, I mean, and I think those athletic skills are more valuable when you're not just standing out at the 3-point line and firing shots.
Okay, Missouri next week will get their first, I guess, in theory, it's a bigger test. They're playing in the Las Vegas Invitational, where they were meet Northwestern, which is struggling, and also Nevada. So not great opponents, but more of a true neutral court setting. So
and first time away from a friendly environment, I think, is the biggest thing with those games.
Okay, well, join us again in a few weeks, and we'll talk about how they fared in those games.